Welcome to today's session. Today we shall be building a strong password generator using Python. To start with, let us first see how the output of the entire program is going to look like by the end of our build. So we're going to run this program and we see. When the program runs, it asks the user to enter password length. So the password length can either has to be greater than 0. So if a user enters 0, it is going to prompt the user to enter a number greater than 0. If a user enters a character, any character, it is going to prompt the user to enter the password length again with this message, invalid input, please enter a number. The same thing that applies to special characters. Good. So if a user successfully enters maybe a number like 12 to be the password length, the system will be able to continue. And when it continues, it will ask the user to either include numbers or not. If the user accepts by typing a Y, then the program continues. If types an N, the program stops. So for our case, we're going to first try to enter something which is not a Y or an N, maybe like a number like 6. It is going to prompt it's going to bring a message, invalid input. Please enter Y or N. If the user inputs something like a character, the same thing. But if a user successfully enters a Y or an N, for example, a capital Y, or even maybe spaces Y, capital, it is going to accept. Then include numbers. So include numbers as accepted. Then include symbols. It is going to be the same thing. So if a user enters something not a Y or N, it is going to deny. But if a user successfully enters it, or maybe a capital Y or a small y like this, even if maybe adds spaces, it is going to run and then it is going to generate a password. Generated password is this one. So it is going to generate a password including characters, special symbols, and even numbers. Like this one is 0. Yeah, so after that, it is going to tell the user whether they want to generate another password. They can either say yes or no, the same thing. There's also validation here, because if the user enters 0, it is not going to accept. It has to enter either a Y or an N. If they accept with Y, the program runs now, starts to ask again for the length, and then it repeats itself. But if the user chooses N, which is no, then it is going to stop there. So welcome aboard. This is Code with Kamate, and today we shall be building this program. To start with, we are going to create a folder on the desktop where we are going to store our code for this program. So I can call this folder Code with Kamate. We open this folder. We can open it in VS Code by right-clicking and selecting Open with VS Code, or you can just drag into VS Code. So the folder has successfully been opened in VS Code, and now we are good to start. We shall start by creating a file here, and we call it strong password generator.py. All Python files have to end with .py file extension. Press enter. And now we are ready to write our code. I hope, let me zoom in so that the code can be seen very well. So to start with, we shall start by printing the heading. Can be something like Python password generator. So we shall start by printing. This is a function. Print Python password generator. So when you run the program, to see the preview in the terminal wheel, Good, we have this Python password generator. I think we can also add something here small, just to make it look better. We can print equal signs 40 times. We do the same down here so that our program can look good. Wow, so we have our password Python password generator here. Now, to start with, we are going to start by requesting a user to enter the password length. As we saw from the program, is the first thing which a user has to input, and we are going to store that in a variable called length. So we shall say length, then we assign it to input, and we shall prompt the user to enter password length. So when we use /n, it means that it will be on a new line. So this input is length, and we are entering password length. So we have to format it to make sure that it is an integer. We don't need someone to enter a character. So just say int like this. Good. So when someone runs the program, they'll be able to enter the length. However, if they enter 5, well and good. But on the other hand, let's run again. If they enter something like an X or maybe any letter, the program is going to crash, and we don't want to see this crash in our program. Instead, we have to tell the user to enter a valid number. So let's get back to our code. So how do we do that? So we have what we call try and accept in Python. So we shall first try to see if the user has entered the right thing, if it is an integer. Then if not, we also display for them a message. So that's why we are going to use try here. Then we push this using tab so that this line of code is under try. Remember, in Python, indentation is very important. So we shall try a length, we equate it to that. Then after, we shall now have the except value error. So accept the value error, and then if the value entered is not a number as we expect, we should now give a user a specific message, and will be like invalid. Good. So we shall prompt the user to enter a valid input. So they have to enter a number. That is the first thing, which means that now when we run the program and maybe a user enters something like T, it is going to be like invalid input, please enter a number. However, after we have done this, we cannot just stop here, because the user should be able now to try to enter the number. So the program should not stop. So because of that, we have what we call loops. So we're going to use a loop to make sure that the program keeps running until when we get the right value. So at the top here, we are going to create a while loop, while true. While true means that this code is going to continue running unless until when the condition is met. So when we say while true, then we put the whole code into that while block. It is going to run until when we get the right length. So now let's try to run this, and we see when a user types maybe a Y, it is going to be like enter password length. Invalid input, please enter a number. Then the user should be able to enter the password length once again. Yeah, that is that. Then the other thing we need to do is that we need to also verify this length entered. The length entered should not be 0. That is 1. we are going to create a function. So this function helps us to execute this line of code or this block of code whenever we need to use it, not all the time. So when we create a function here, we define a function. You can give it any function name using the def keyword. Maybe I can call it get number, function get number, and then we push the whole of this code in there by pressing tab. So when we create this function will only run if we call it. Functions in Python run only when you call them. Before calling them, they don't run. So get number, yes, and then while true, then we try and accept the value error. So we want to check if this length is greater than 0. That's when we should be able to accept. So if length is greater than 0, so if length is greater than 0, then we can return length. So every function in Python has to return something. Whenever you define a function, it has to be returning something to the function after it has been called. That's why right now when we call this function get number, when we call this function like this and then we run the program, let's run the program, enter password length, and maybe someone enters 5, it is going to run and return the number and then stop there. So that is what it means. So we are not calling this one right now. So having done that, after the user has entered the number, we now need to also ask the user whether they want to include maybe numbers or symbols in their password. So what you are going to do, we are going to create another input or another prompt to the user. For example, we can ask the user to input a number. Maybe we say we create a variable, use numbers, and then this can be an input include numbers, where we expect the user to either type a Y or an N. A Y for yes and N for no. So that is that. Remember, we shall also need the user. This was the use numbers. We can also ask the user if they want to include symbols. Use symbols. So include symbols. Good. So include symbols. So it is also a yes and a no. Now, because we have all these messages, and remember at the bottom, we shall also ask the user if they want to continue generating another password. Yeah, we shall create another variable at the bottom towards the end of our program to see if a user should be able to continue to run the program. So instead of us keeping on asking all these all the time, we can create a simple function which we shall be calling whenever we need to put in a user input. So how do we do that? We can just create a function using the def keyword in Python. So this function, I can call it get choice. But this function this time around is going to be taking one argument, which will be the message, because this function has to take in a message or an argument. So this argument, you can call it any variable. You may have called it message because it will be taking in such kind of messages. Now, after I've created our function, let me first comment these two out by pressing a control with /. So after we have defined get choice and then get choice as a function taking in an argument called message, we can now be able to get choice, the choice of the user, and this is going to be an input. So this input is going to be taking in the message which we shall define in our various variables. Now, when you receive this message, when the user is responding with a yes or a no, we have to make sure that some users can maybe add in spaces, as we saw when maybe we were running the program. So what we do, we use the .trip method to make sure that whatever the user enters before it is stored into this variable called choice has been converted, all the spaces in it has been removed. And on top of that, a user maybe might enter a capital Y, yet for us we need a small y. So what we do, we can also add another method called the lower. So this one converts all the user's input into lowercase, so that whenever we are checking for y, even if the y was capital, it is going to still be recognized by our system as y. Now, remember our choices, we just need a y or a no. So we have to confirm that our choice, if choice in, we can create a simple list with y and no. Okay, this means that if the choice is either a y or a no, okay, if it is in this range, y or n, so what should we do? We can return choice and we end the program, because now here the user will have entered a valid input. Yeah, how about if maybe the choice is not among these two, is not either a y or an n, whether capital or small? What should we do in that case? So we have our else block. Else, we have our else block. What should we print to the user? We can print to the user and we say enter, please enter y or n. This error is because of you have to, when you're using single quotes, when you have single quotes within your code, you cannot put everything into single quotes. Okay, so if the choice is not a y or n, then we have to tell the user to enter y or n. The other thing we have to do is if the user receives this message, please enter y or n, we need it to repeat now. So that one calls for a while loop. So such that if a user that has not entered what we want, then it should prompt the user to enter y or n and then bring him back to including numbers or including symbols based on the message we shall have passed into this function. So we shall have to use while true so that it can loop through this. So we have to push this code into the while block like this. Good. So if we are to test out this function, we can call this function get choice. And when we are calling it, we call it and we give it a certain argument or a certain message, like maybe include numbers. So when you run this, so this function will not, this upper function on line 6 is not going to run because we are not calling it anywhere. We expect only the function get choice to run. Let's run it and we see what is going to happen. So it is like include numbers. So if a user types a number like 5, it is going to display please enter y or n. But if the user enters a y, it is going to stop because it is returning. Okay, so here we need to put colons. Good. So now, having seen that, the next thing now is now to let me also comment this out. The next thing is now to create a function which is going to create now the password. So we have seen how each of these functions works. So we shall be calling them at the bottom to run our program. So we shall define another function and we call it create password. Now this function will take different arguments. For us to create a password, we shall need three things from the user. We shall need the password length. After the password length, we shall need a variable like use numbers, whether a user has accepted to use numbers or not. And also, we shall see if the user has accepted to use symbols. So, the first thing we are going to do, we are going to access all the characters in the English alphabet, that is A to Z, both capital and small. So how are we going to access them? We have an inbuilt module in Python called string, which we are going to import on top here for us to use it and have access to all those numbers. So import string. After importing string, we can now go back to the where we have been here on line 29. So we now have string. So when we get string and we access ASCII letters, this one means that we are accessing all the alphabet letters, that is A to Z. So when we print this out, let's confirm that. Okay, this one can't print because we are not calling the function. I just wanted us to check how it brings about them. So we can comment this out and print this. Good. So as you can see here, it is able to print all the alphabet letters from A to Z, both capital and small. So that's what we are going to use. Let's get back to our function. So having seen these characters, we can now store them in a variable called characters. Good. So we've stored them in the characters variable. So now we have to see if maybe a user wants to use numbers. We can say if we're using now conditionals to check if a user has used numbers, as we shall be getting the answers from these prompts. So now if use numbers is equal to y which means yes. So what should we do if this is so? So we have to get characters. We update this variable characters plus equals. Plus equals means that we want to add in something to characters variable. So characters plus equals, we now access string dot digits. So string dot digits gives us numbers from 0 to 9. So if use symbols is equal to y, we are going to update characters plus equals string dot punctuation. So this is going to give us all the punctuation marks used in generating our passwords. So now, having seen that, what else do we need? Since we already have the numbers, we have the characters, it is now time to generate the password. So we can create a variable where we shall store our password, and we can initiate it with empty strings. So currently it is having nothing. Now, this password should be equal to the length. So it has to always depend on the length that the user has entered. Therefore, because of that, we are going to use a for loop, because it is going to loop through all the characters, since characters contains all the characters, numbers, and symbols, and then loop through them, and then compare with the length that the user has suggested. So we shall say for underscore in range length. I'm going to explain why I'm using underscore just in a second. For underscore in length, so what should we do? Now get the password variable, and then we plus equals We now have a function we call random. So random is a function which is going to rotate, move through these characters and then pick them based on how many characters the user has requested. So random as a function has to be imported on top here. Import random. So let's get back down. So password plus equals, we now update the password variable. We update it with random dot choice. So this is going to make a choice from where? From characters, of which characters already contains all the numbers and the symbols. So why we are using a small dash here, I mean an underscore, it's because we don't want to know, we are not minding about the index at which we are at, because most for loops they have a variable like for x in this, but for us here our work is just to move for the basing on how the length is gonna be described by the user. So we don't need a variable because you don't need to access the index. That's why we use an underscore. So having seen this password, we can just return the password. And then, so this function will be returning the password. After returning the password, now we can start accessing all the functions. So we have a function for getting the length, we have a function for handling the messages, and we have a function for generating the password. So having got all that, we now come at the bottom here, and now we are going to first get the length. So how do we get the length? The length of the password. So the length of the password, we can call our function here, which is going to help us get for us that length. So when we call this function get number, so when we say length get number, it means that it is going to come here into this function and run it. So running it, this function is going to give out to tell the user to enter password length and go through everything as we've been seeing. So let's try that out and we see. Let's run, enter length. So if a user enters something wrong, it is going to deny, but if a user enters something correct, it is going to stop there, which is good. However, we don't want the function to stop on that. The function has to continue and handle these other choices. So that's why it is always good to have a while true loop, so that this function uh, keeps on running. All these lines of code keeps on running whenever we call them until when we reach a desired password that we need. So while true, then length get number. Then the other thing now, we can also see if we need to use numbers. How do we do that? We can just create a variable like how we have this one here, get choice include numbers. So we can store this in a variable. We can call it any name, like maybe numbers equals get choice, but this one has to be in the while loop. So numbers get choice include numbers. So when we call get choice function with this message include numbers, it's going to call the function up here get choice with that message, and then the whole of this line of block, the whole of this block of code is going to run, getting a choice, comparing if it is y or n, and then returning it. If not, then invalid input, and then it is going to loop through, because since we have the while loop here. We shall do the same to symbols. So I copy symbols down here. I can just copy this line, symbols. So get choice include symbols. The same thing is calling the same function. So meaning that our program right now is able to request the user to get the number. After that, it also asks them if they will use numbers or not. Then after that, it also goes ahead to see if they are going to include symbols into their password. So having seen all those answers, what should we do next? We can now call the create password function. When we call the create password function, is the one which is going to take in the length, the numbers, plus the symbols. These numbers here and this one does not matter. If you want, you can use different variable names as long as the number of arguments passed here, length, use numbers and use symbols, there are 3 of them. You must give the function 3 arguments also. But using numbers and they are using use numbers, that's the same thing, because the numbers will be treated as use numbers as long as it is passed as the second argument here, just in the same position. So we shall call password as create password as a function, and then after create password, we are going to give it the length. We're going to give it the length. Then we are going to give it numbers and then symbols. So now the password generated, we are going to store it in a variable called password. Okay. We are going to store it in a variable called password. So it means that our password that is generated is always stored in this variable. So if we print password, like this and we run our program, enter password length, maybe 7, include numbers, yes or no, yes. We have to put some colons here. Include symbols, yes. And so let's check one more time. Let's run the program again. Enter password length 12. Include numbers, yes. Include symbols, yes. So it is printing true. Let's check, let's debug and we see why. Let's get back to the code and we see define get numbers. We see where there could be an error. Length, if length is greater than this, return length, yes. But here we also need to add an else statement, just in case maybe the length is not greater than, is less than 0. So we print enter a number greater than 0. But that's not the problem. For it is printing 8, yes, except var error, this is fine. Then this is our function, get choice message, while true. Yes, we strip and we apply the lower. If choice in this one, return, yes, print this, good. Define create password, length, use numbers, yes, it's taking 3 arguments. Characters, yes, numbers, yes, password. For this one in range, this password plus equals random dot choice characters, return. So this is what the problem is, because we are returning, this return word is within the for loop. So it means the for loop is just running once and automatically returning the letter or the character at the index of the length. So for us to resolve that, we just have to first leave the loop to run as many times as the length and then return the password. So having done that, let's try again to run our program and we see. I'm going to put 8, include numbers, yes. Include symbols, yes. Good, our password has been generated. So let's print it very well. Also, let me add some columns here and here. And also after printing the password, we have to break. Yes, we have to break. So before printing the password, we can first print something like on a new line, generated password. Then the password will be printed down there. So after we have printed that, we can break. But before we break, we also need to see if the user wants to generate another password or if the user wants to exit the program. So what we can do, we can just call our function which is responsible for handling messages, the get choice. So we can say get get choice as a function, and then we give it an argument. It takes one argument called message, which can be anything. So on a new line, generate another password. We expect a y or an n. The validation will be handled as the function, as we have set in the function. So now we can store the variable of the user, maybe again here. Then after doing that, we have to check if again is not y. If again is not y, it means that the user has decided to press to put maybe n. So what should we do? We print on a new line, thank you for using our program developed by Kamate, by Code with Kamate. Good. And then from there, we can now break our program. So let's try to run it one more time. Enter password length. Let's try to put y. Invalid input. Please enter a number. Let's try to put a 0. Enter a number greater than 0. Yes, our validation is working. Let's enter maybe 12. Good. Include numbers. Yes or no. If someone puts a number, it is not gonna work. Invalid input. Please enter y or n. So if the answer is n, which means that you don't want to include numbers, it is going to skip that. Include symbols, maybe yes. And then the password generated is going to be this one without the number as the user has requested. Generate another password. If you put 6, invalid input, please enter y or n. If